I think I'm just so glad that I shared the space in this extravagantly beautiful city with people from so many places with their own stories. And I think, yeah, that has been great. Yeah. My long-term ambition is to become an engaged scholar, and I think through the Fulbright experience as a student, I could do my LLM in International Legal Studies at NYU School of Law. I could study international human rights law in a global classroom, international law, and also legal philosophy, and really gain like different perspectives and like broaden my horizon as you do through, you know, education and moving somewhere else and like sharing sharing also the study experience of people from all around the world. But I think it's also really, you know, connecting with people and building friendships, forging a professional network also with professors and human rights advocates around the world. And I think that is, you know, I can call up people from somewhere else and be like, hey, I have this idea, do you want to collaborate maybe? And I think that is really something that comes from my international experience and living in New York, studying in New York. And that's what I'm very grateful for to Fulbright. I could add the post-degree academic training to my degree, and I worked at the NYU Global Justice Clinic and a human rights project, emerging metal mining sector in Haiti and human rights and environmental rights violations. And I think also being with human rights grassroots activists in Haiti through traveling there and learning from their experience really, that has shaped me. And I think I didn't just gain professional skills, but I also really realized how you know, like actions or corporate decision making in the capital or like in capitals in the global north and the US or Europe influence people in other parts of the world. That inspires me to become what I want to become eventually. And I think that's an engaged scholar who, on the one hand, researches human rights problems and international law problems, but also has an impact outside of the ivory tower. When I finished my LLM in international legal studies, I stayed in New York and started working as a research assistant for different NYU professors and at the NYU Global Justice Clinic on the Haiti project. And, you know, I extended my visas as long as I could. And then eventually my visas couldn't be extended and I could not relocate to Port-au-Prince in Haiti. That was the original plan. Like I should have be a human rights consultant who liaises between New York and Port-au-Prince. That eventually wasn't possible because people started marching against corruption and for, you know, all of their economic and social rights, because the situation just deteriorated ever since. And then at some point I came back to, you know, Austria and Vienna and relocated to here. And then of course the world pandemic hit and I was on full-blown job search while the world was closing down. And I think that was a bit of a like financially difficult period, very precarious. And you know, one of my legs was still in New York and one in Vienna. And I think like obviously when you spend 2 years and I think 4 months in total in another country, then you also really live there and are connected and linked. So I think you know, you relocate, but until you're fully relocated, it takes time. Eventually I got hired. I think I was very lucky in that regard by a former Fulbrighter and also NYU alum, and it's my current boss, Professor Reinisch. And that's when I started working at the section for international law and international relations. During this precarity, I continued out of intrinsic motivation to research the question how property rights are talked about under CEDAW. And I will say more about this later. But eventually a book came from that time, which is forthcoming with Oxford University Press in 2024. So I collaborated with a co-author at NYU School of Law on a book now titled Women's Property Rights under CEDAW. And CEDAW is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Ultimately, it's the Women's Rights Convention. The manuscript is submitted, so now we are just waiting for it to be, published with the publisher. But what was it really about? So my contribution to the book was really laying out the jurisprudence of the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and how it talks about property violations in all spheres of women's lives. And first, when I started, I was like, oh, there's just, two decisions that talk, and they're called communications in CEDAW language, and that talk about property violations in family relations. But then I continued, and I started looking at the general recommendations. They are a source on the CEDAW that interpret the convention in an authoritative way. There's also there's the individual communications where individual complainants can go to the committee in Geneva. Those are very few. And there's also inquiry reports. Those are also very few, where the committee goes to countries and investigates systemic and grave breaches of women's rights. And then there's obviously the state reports and the concluding observations where the committee every 4 years provides recommendations to states what they must do in order to improve their women's rights records in all areas of the convention. And then, I moved on to land rights violations of rural women and indigenous women. And then all of a sudden the social benefits were added that are interpreted as property rights violations around the world, and access to financial credit and intellectual property rights. And then gender-based violence and how that also is connected to property in manifold ways. But in a way, I just realized that this very important human rights mechanism that is signed and ratified by 189 states has been speaking to the material condition of women and has been pointing out rights violations for more than 40 years by now. But it's completely overlooked. It's like a secret in international law. It's not really taught much in most law schools, even though it does such an important job. And I think my motivation really has been to put a spotlight on this very important human rights committee and also to make these human rights violations visible. And I think the way I worked as a researcher was like taking almost like photo frames and making these violations visible through going really through the entire data from 2008 to 2022 and providing this comprehensive synthesis of the committee's jurisprudence. And in a way, I'm just reproducing the text, but nobody else has done that, and nobody else has, set together the puzzle in order to speak to property violations that women experience in those 189 state parties. My hope obviously would be like through showing that there also will be change and the people are informed, whether they're policymakers, foreign ministers, or university professors, judges, attorneys, that they know this convention exists and that they know how they can do better or what they must do in order to do better. I think it, in a way, should become almost the constitution of women in order to claim their women's rights around the world. And I think it's the beginning, It's not a finish line, but I think it's the beginning, and I really hope that, given that we worked with a serious publishing house, I really also hope that it will receive attention, a platform, and gain traction so that more mainstream public international law scholars also perceive CEDAW as something important. Well, I will start eventually my doctorate in international law and human rights law because that's almost like the driving license when you want to be an academic and maybe become a professor one day. That I think that's what I need to do next. But I think second to that, I also want to stay involved in human rights project work, and I will prioritize providing my expertise about CEDAW to NGOs and other people who want to consult me. I think what has been probably most influential is really the human encounters, and I was extremely lucky in a double sense, because my flatmate in New York was a Fulbrighter in Austria, Hamburg, and we moved in together in New York in the Belvedere at Ocean Avenue next to Prospect Park. And I think having this constant conversation about our different experiences and really learning from each other, I think has been wonderful. Aside from that, I have friends from all over the world now. A lot of them very smart Fulbrighters. I just spoke to one of them who's becoming a legal philosopher and who sat next to me on my first day at NYU, and then we realized, we both are Fulbrighters and we both go to NYU. And we ever since have become good friends. And I think that has just been, enlarging your perspective, connecting with humans around the world you probably wouldn't meet if you just always stay in your own corner, and having this curiosity and openness. I think reclaiming this societal space and also building it together with people, it's ultimately not just, scholarship and the sum of money you receive and a degree you do, but it's also entering a conversation, I really think, with people from all over the world. And that's probably the most beautiful thing that Fulbright has brought in my life. I would advise them to say yes to opportunities and be curious. That's kind of the advice everyone gives. But nonetheless, I think I got really wonderful opportunities out of my Fulbright. I ended up working at NYU. I ended up being a co-author of a book, and I traveled to countries through my job that I've never been to before. And I think it was also I got put into a space where people had resources and a lot of opportunities. And I think when you are ready to not just take a linear life path, I think that can bring you really unique experiences. And I think it's wonderful not just to have this international network, but also the Fulbright community in Austria. And I think that would be really nice to build and keep on building.